My name is Staff Sergeant Pete Greer. I've been a U.S. Army Ranger for 12. I've seen my fair share of combat and things that still haunt me, but nothing prepared me for what happened to my team in that valley. There are no neat terms for it, no code words, no bullet points, just the screams from my teammates. Command, in their infinite wisdom, wanted confirmation on reports of a large bipedal creature that was lurking near Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. They called it a joint training opportunity between the Army and Air Force. A routine field exercise with a human factor to observe unknown hostiles with unknown intent. The drone footage wasn't good enough. Cue us getting voluntold to recon the area. We'd done that 100 times in 100 places. It sounded like a bunch of garbage anyway. So we weren't too worried. The 7 of us inserted before dusk. The mountains around us were black against a fading thin strip of gray sky, and it was a bitter cold. Each breath felt like my sinuses froze. Our boots crunched in the frost-laden ground. It was a cloudy, moonless night as we entered the forest. NODS were the only way we could see. The point man, Torres, kept a slow and measured pace. He was good and experienced. Donovan and Clay handled flank security. Then Price, Weller, Finch, and me brought up the rear as team leader. We moved as cohesive unit, trained and disciplined, every man an expert in his skill set. Training prepares you for most situations, but there was nothing in the manual about what lay ahead. We were about an hour into our mission when Torres held up his fist. We dropped to a knee instantly. I watched him point to some tracks on the ground. They looked like bear prints until my brain caught up with what I was seeing. They weren't paw prints. They were footprints, huge footprints. The stride between prints was absurd. They belonged to a thing twice my height. Finch whispered, "What the hell?" No one answered. The forest around us had gone silent. Even our breathing felt loud. We had orders, so we pushed on anyway. That was a huge mistake. So was dismissing the mission intel as garbage. We entered the valley. The land opened into a shallow basin surrounded by steep ridges and thick timber. A half-frozen creek cut through the center. It was a perfect ambush point, high ground on 3 sides, natural concealment, with limited avenues of approach. We needed to get to high ground. Torres stopped again, raised his fist, and looked up the hill. I followed his gaze and saw them woven hut-like structures tucked into the trees. They were barely visible through branches and early light. There were spirals and slashes scratched into the trees just before the structures. They looked like a warning or a boundary line. The more we looked, the more markers we found. There were stacked stones, along with bones and animal skulls hanging from branches. Weller muttered, "This is a goddamn village." It felt like we were trespassing. "Hey, it's Bigfoot's village," Clay said with a laugh. The joke was met with groans and eye rolls. Then Torres made a small motion to his left. "Movement," he said quietly. I didn't see anything at first, just some shadows and tree trunks. Then something large shifted behind a pine. It was part of a head and a shoulder. Every instinct in my body screamed to leave this place alone, but command wanted intel. I keyed the mic. "Hold position." A few seconds passed, then the woods exploded with howls and movement all around us. The howls were too deep for a human, and too human to be an animal. My chest vibrated. It was a sound so primal, I almost pissed myself. Torres snapped his rifle up. I saw him track something quickly moving through the brush. 1 second, he was there, then he was gone. He was yanked backward off the trail into the trees so violently his feet left the ground. He didn't even have time to scream. Branches snapped, leaves and snow sprayed. It was like watching a man get swallowed by the forest itself. "Torres!" Donovan shouted. Clay bolted toward where Torres vanished. I shouted after him, "Hold positions!" But something stepped into view. I couldn't wrap my mind around what I was seeing. It was 7, maybe 8 feet tall, with huge shoulders and massive arms, covered in dark matted hair. Its face was more human than animal. It looked furious, and it wasn't alone. A dozen of them flooded out of the trees, a whole wall of moving muscles and hair. They spread out with coordination, taking positions, cutting off lines of retreat. This wasn't the act of random animals. They were using tactics. I heard Finch's voice crack as he screamed, "My God!" Donovan opened fire first. His carbine thundered. One of his rounds hit the closest creature in the shoulder. I saw a spray of dark blood. The creature went into a rage. Its speed was unreal. It hit Donovan so hard, it knocked him out of his boots. His body lifted off the ground and slammed against a tree. His bones crunched. He crumpled to the ground, barely breathing. It grabbed him by the leg and began slamming him onto the ground over and over. "Weapons free," I said, and let loose a 3-round burst. Clay opened up on full auto, rounds tearing into the trees. Weller and Price fired in controlled bursts, trying to create distance, trying to carve a path. Finch was in sheer panic. Then I saw Torres again. He was on the ground, half hidden in brush, his helmet torn off, his face smeared with blood. He looked up at me, eyes wide, reaching out to me. Then something came out of the trees behind him. It was bigger than the others and looked older. Its fur was streaked with gray. Its face was scarred. One ear looked torn. It stared at me. It knew exactly how fragile we were. It looked at me and said, "Weapons free," in a deep guttural voice, and the rest of them descended on us. Torres screamed as it grabbed him by the arm and lifted him off the ground. He kicked and thrashed, boots striking nothing. He looked at me and screamed, "Shoot it!" I fired 3-round burst at its head. It moved so quickly I missed the headshot. I hit it once in the chest and once in the neck. Blood sprayed across the snow, but it barely reacted. Then it slammed Torres down like a rag doll. He stopped moving. Price shouted, "We gotta go! We gotta go!" I tried to regain control, but the valley had turned into chaos. Gunfire, screaming, thudding impacts, the snapping of bones. I saw Weller get lifted by the waist and thrown across the creek, landing with a sound like a sack of broken bones and meat. He didn't get up. Clay was still firing, screaming curses, backing away, until one of them came out of the brush behind him and wrapped both hands around his torso and squeezed. Clay's scream turned into a gurgle. Finch ran to him, but a creature struck him from the side so hard he cartwheeled into a boulder. Blood splattered all over the rock. His body went limp as he slid to the ground. I've been in firefights where I've lost people before. This was different. This was slaughter. I pulled Price up the ridge. We fired as we moved, not even aiming anymore. We were just trying to keep their heads down. The radio was useless. The valley swallowed everything. The only sounds were our panic and the roars of the Sasquatch. We reached the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the edge of the basin, when the ground shook with heavy footsteps behind us. Price looked over his shoulder and yelled, "Sarge!" His voice was cut off as a massive hand grabbed him by the packstrap. Price's body snapped backward, his rifle flying from his hands, his mouth open in a scream that ended when the creature's other hand clamped over his face. It started biting him all over the head and face. I dumped a full mag into the creature. It barely reacted. The creature didn't even stop. Price's legs kicked twice, then he went limp. I was shoved from behind, and I fell onto a tree root. My rifle was gone. My ribs were broken. Every breath was agony. I lay there looking at the trees swaying above me. One of the Sasquatch stood over me. It bent down until its face was inches away from mine. I gagged on its hot and foul breath. The creature stared into my eyes and stomped on my right shin with its massive foot breaking both bones. My scream blended with the screams of my team. I didn't fight. I didn't have the strength or the will. I lay there holding my leg and prepared myself for death. The Sasquatch looked away from me toward the valley where the others were finishing what they started. A chorus of violent sounds, bones breaking, men screaming and crying for their mothers. Then it looked back down at me, shook its head, and turned away. I don't know if I wasn't worth the effort, or if it wanted to leave a survivor to tell the tale. I lay there until I could no longer hear them stomping off into the distance. I crawled over to where the carnage had taken place. I had to check on my team. The scene was gruesome. I can't even describe it. I started sobbing uncontrollably as I looked at the broken bodies of my teammates. "Why me?" I screamed. I crawled to each man, grabbed their dog tags. I slowly crawled uphill until my arms gave out. I heard distant whoops echoing through the trees. I hid under a log. At one point, I smelled that wet animal stink again and nearly vomited in terror. Hours passed, maybe more. I started crawling again. By late afternoon, I reached a narrow clearing where my radio finally crackled back to life. I squeezed the talk button so hard I almost broke it. "This is Echo Team Lead. They're all dead. I need extraction." "Echo Team, say again," Command said. "Your signal is bad." I kept repeating, "One survivor, one survivor. They're all dead." A Blackhawk came at dusk. I saw it through the trees. I waved weakly. When the crew chief pulled me aboard, his face changed the moment he saw my eyes. They asked what happened. They asked where the others were. I directed them to the location. There wasn't a place for the chopper to land. The crew chief took pictures of the scene, and the pilot relayed the coordinates to command for recovery. They flew me to base. There were questions, investigators, a chaplain, medical exams, psych evals. Then they put me in a room with 2 suits. They wanted map coordinates and extensive details. I told them the truth. They ordered me to say we were ambushed by militia. They talked about sending a company to hunt the creatures. I told them to send each man with his own body bag. The suits looked at me. The one in charge nodded and said, "Okay, son, you made your point." The valley became a no-go zone on our maps. The families were told a helicopter crashed during training. I was told to forget, but I can't. I know those things are still there, waiting for the day the higher-ups decide to go back. If that happens, there won't be any survivors to tell the story.